most of you, many of you, but not all of you. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Freddie, for the invitation and just a chance to be with other tree people on a nice summer morning is always an enjoyable thing. I'm going to talk about, I think, a topic that is a shared sort of passion and interest for many people in this room and in the community more broadly. And I'm going to maybe do a little bit of reflecting on that topic as someone who's relatively new to the region, as someone who, over the past 3 years after arriving here from a place with a lot more water, has kind of been observing what people are passionate about, what people are working on, what they're sort of committing themselves to try and understand ways that we at CSU can help and support that work. You know, as a land grant institution, I think we really want to be a value and an asset to many of the things that you're doing. And so your passions, to a large extent, should be driving what we're doing, what we're focused on. And so tree sort of evaluation and observation, this has been a long part of the Department of Horticulture's priorities in in the tree space and woody plants more broadly. And as I've been here for the past 3 years, like I said, one of the things that I've really been impressed by is the passion that many of you share for that topic as well. And so I want to maybe just talk a little bit about this work and propose a couple of ways maybe that we could work more effectively together to advance some of our goals and interests, right? We've been talking about tree diversity for a very long time, right? Maybe for decades now. That's telling. Yeah.
People online can't see your
do I need to push this thing? Well, that's too bad. Is it easier to do it on there?
Yeah, if you give me the toggle, I can share it on this one. And then
I gave him permission to share on his computer.
do you
Oh,
want that?
why don't we try that? Yeah. I think that's what Freddie told me to do. I didn't listen.
My alternative was you using the ground laptop, so listen to Freddie.
Okay, let's push this thing again. I need to install it again. No.
You should actually want to see.
Okay. Cool. Okay, sorry about the inevitable technical hiccups. So I wanted to start maybe with a quiz or an exploration or a demonstration of the importance of this topic in one sense. On the screen, you can see probably very poorly some aerial images of experimental nurseries, test beds, trial plots where there are trees planted, have been planted in some cases for quite a long time, in different parts of the state. And there are observations ongoing, right? And some insights that are being generated from this work. Can any of you recognize quickly any of those plots, any of those trial areas? Allison?
Is number 2 the State Forest Nursery?
No, but good guess. Yeah, the State Forest Service Nursery in Fort Collins, is that the one you're thinking of? Yeah, there's some cool stuff out there. But that is actually not on the screen. Oh, anybody else? Anybody else have any guesses?
Cami knows what number 1 is.
Who does? Cami knows? Yeah, Cami knows. Cami sees that one all the time. Okay, so that basically revealed number 1. Number 1 is in Grand Junction. Yeah. So that was a trial plot that was started by Dr. Collette, I don't know when, maybe around 2000, I think. So it's been there earlier than that. So several decades it's been there. There's actually a reasonable, surprising amount of diversity in that plot. It's a little forest patch that people that work at that research station really enjoy, and people that visit like to explore on their own. So that one is not really very accessible unless you're out, on the western slope. Number 3.
Is that a national trial?
SCSU.
by Spring Creek.
No,
Spring Creek?
no, but it looks like it's by a creek
Yeah.
of some kind, some sort of waterway, so that's a good guess, yeah. We actually removed all those dumps, so, they were all doing terrible, they were dying. We learned what we could from that. Basically what that trial showed was triumph is competence. Any other guesses? Which one do you think is the closest to where we are right now? It's 2 or 3. 3? I don't think so. So it's 2. 2 is a very small experimental nursery at Regis University that Sonia John runs. If you haven't been there to visit her and see some of the things that she's trying and growing, you should absolutely go visit, and you should probably, mark off half a day or the entire day, because she's got a lot of things. And she's got a lot of knowledge to share, right? So that's a really valuable resource that is known to a certain extent, but probably it's undervalued and underappreciated in a lot of ways. She is doing that work largely out of her own passion, right? She's the volunteer curator for that arboretum. She's, passionately sourcing plants from all over, North America, and maybe even more widely than that, with help from other people. And it's impressive. The third one that is on the right is one that we went to visit this year. And we met Lana and spent some time with Lana and Adrian at this experimental nursery that's actually out in Aurora. And it's a very cool place where they're kind of doing the same thing. Again, motivated largely by their passion and their interest to try and expand the species palette that we can rely on in Colorado and increase the diversity of urban forests. We know that diversity brings resilience to any community, including the urban forest. And so that's a great goal that we've been working on for a long time. And these, nurseries are sort of an underappreciated, uncelebrated sort of example of that in many ways. But there are others. There's all kinds of programming and initiatives that is coordinated by organizations and cities and individuals. It's all kind of in different ways contributing to the same goal of expanding the diversity of our urban forest. So the STEP program is something that's been around for a long time. It's part of this group, and is one way that you all are sort of contributing to this this effort over many years. DBG certainly has been, contributing to that, both through the Tree Diversity Conference, but also just through their exploration and collections. Regis University and CSU, but also nurseries, municipalities. I know the city of Erie, the city of Fort Collins certainly have a reputation for, trying to push the boundaries of tree diversity as much as you can over a long time. There are undoubtedly other municipalities, other individuals, other organizations that are doing this that I don't know about, just because it often happens just, sort of informally, right? It's not necessarily something that's really structured or something that we're always out there sort of promoting, because it's a long-term investment, right? It takes a long time to plant trees and to source trees and to make observations, up to the point where you have the confidence to have an opinion about a species, right? That can take a really, really long time. But I really have been impressed. Whenever I meet with someone who is doing this work, I'm in awe in a lot of ways, because it's such an impressive demonstration of the conviction that these people have that this is something important that's really worth investing, often their own personal time and personal resources in. That's something that's really remarkable. And at the same time, one thing that I often reflect on is, wow, I should be writing this down, or I should be recording our conversations, or can you please write a book about everything that you've learned? Because I think there are more people that could benefit and that would want to know and learn from some of the things that you all have learned informally over the years. So I think that's kind of one thing I want to explore a little bit together, is maybe ways that we can expand the accessibility of the knowledge this community has accumulated over many decades. But I want to talk a little bit more also about CSU's efforts in this space. historically and also moving forward in a way that we can sort of be a part of these projects. So historically, traditional sort of plant exploration and evaluation, long-term evaluations on the CSU campus and in other parts of the state has been something that we have supported and managed and maintained and will continue to do moving into the future, given the significance of this work and the interest that many of you have for it. I'll talk a little bit about the Heritage Arboretum on campus and work that we're doing to just move that institution forward and sustain that institution into the future. And hopefully that'll be something that you're interested in learning about and supporting and participating in as well. But I also want to talk just kind of quickly about some sort of research projects that we're just getting started that we are hoping will sort of accelerate and inform some of these conversations in a useful way at the same time. So, you know, some of the major themes that come up when I listen to people who are talking about tree evaluations and tree species and their utility for Colorado is their drought tolerance and water use. Like, how much water does it really take to maintain something? Are they really water hungry or thirsty? Or can they persist through our difficult sort of limited environment rainfall, right? So their drought tolerance, their water use patterns are something that I think is really important, a dimension that's important to many of you, but also cold hardiness, right? Their ability to survive through our winters and the extreme temperature fluctuations that are common in our winters is also an important sort of characteristic. There are other things that you are looking for in trees besides these two dimensions, but these are two that I think are important and that we're trying to contribute to. So in terms of water use and drought tolerance studies, we're setting up a small experimental plot at the Spur campus, part of the Forestry hub there. We're collaborating with the State Forest Service. We're going to be installing 80 trees on the Spur campus, hopefully this fall, with help from Super Trees. Probably. We're really trying to find some unusual things, so it's not an easy job, and we're thankful that there's a nursery that's willing to kind of help us find some stuff that's maybe a little bit unusual. We're going to be monitoring their water use patterns over seasons, and we're also going to be subjecting them to sort of experimental simulated droughts and evaluating how well they tolerate that and how they respond to those droughts. So that's happening at Spur. And then up on main campus, we're just getting started with some cold hardiness testing as well. And we're really kind of interested maybe in measuring and evaluating the cold hardiness of plants that we're bringing up from southern locations, right? That seems to be a promising place for exploring new unutilized species that are obviously adapted to hot and dry conditions. But the question is, can they get through our winters? Do they have enough buffer in terms of cold hardiness to make it through those really sudden, severe cold snaps? And so we're going to be working on probably some Gamble oak provenances, some Arizona cypress provenances, and maybe one other tree species this winter to inform the sort of that sort of part of this conversation. So hopefully that'll give us some idea about differences among genotypes or selections, ones that might be more promising for our location that maybe aren't as risky in terms of winter dieback. So that plot shows some of those sort of preliminary measurements that we did this February, just to sort of figure out which method might work well for us. Freddie was generous enough to share some tissue with us. This is some measurements of Chinese tulip tree. The peaks on there basically represent a release of heat that's associated with a freezing event. So you see a large peak that's on the left. That's the sort of non-lethal freezing event. That's the large amount of extracellular water, the water that's removed from living tissue when the plant is acclimating to winter conditions. And the smaller peaks representing a smaller release of heat is the lethal freezing event associated with the intracellular water freezing. And so we can determine what temperatures the plant tissue will have experience a lethal freeze at different times of the winter in response to changing environmental conditions. So we're hoping that will be useful, but we also want to be working on species that are interesting to you. So if you have suggestions or recommendations about things that you are uncertain about in terms of cold hardiness, please let us know. Particularly if you have tissue, if you have plants that we can sample. That's often a hard thing, right? We want to work on some new species, but we need to test something. We need to be able to find it. So that's some of the work that we're doing in terms of sort of more scientific research projects that will hopefully be useful and contribute to this. So if you're interested in learning more about those things, if you want to participate in some way, if you have advice for us, please come and talk to me, come talk to Carrie or anybody else who's involved in that work. And we'd really be interested in making this useful for you. Yeah.
Are you doing
Yeah.
budget, Sam?
Sure.
You said the word provinces, is that like varieties? Or like what's the?
Yeah, where that particular selection was obtained from, right? So it's Gamble oak, for example, occurs up in southern Colorado, but it also has a much wider distribution. So should we be selecting Gamble oaks from New Mexico? We're interested in Gila monster that's selected from around the Gila National Forest in New Mexico as something that is potentially promising. But we'd like to evaluate its full hardiness with respect to maybe some more northerly provinces of Gamble oak in Colorado as well. That's the one, if you see a picture of Scott like standing next to a big, nice shade tree form of Gamble oak, that's that selection. So if we could get Gamble oaks to do that here, that'd be awesome, right? It's kind of a question whether or not to do it or not. Cool, yeah, if you have questions, feel free to just jump in. So I also want to talk for a second about some of the ways that we're going to sort of sustain our long-term plant evaluation into the future. And this piece of land on the CSU campus really is kind of at the center of that work. This is the departmental arboretum. It is currently called the Heritage Arboretum, but we're kind of going through a strategic planning process. We're actually sort of reevaluating all aspects of this institution and even thinking about renaming it. And this is just a good opportunity when someone new comes in to just kind of, question everything in a way and reevaluate everything and give us an opportunity to maybe refocus and reorient where that might be necessary. So this is our inventory. It's kind of online right now as in a beta, whatever trial instance as a test. It's not publicly available really on our website yet, but we're adding to and refining our website. We'll be putting this up soon. So this is, a pretty diverse tree collection up in Fort Collins. What tree what is your favorite tree? What would you like to search for?
Is the southern magnolia still alive?
So I said no.
No.
Sorry. If you go to Regis, Sonia has the southern magnolia that I think is like 18 inches tall. But it's alive. I don't think it's alive. There's a galaxy that looks pretty good. There's a few others, but no southerns. Yeah. What else? Sorry, we can't find that one. What else? Any other ideas? What do you want to look for? Blue ash? Yeah, I mean, you know that there. Amanda came to visit us. So that's what? Fraxinus quadrangulata. Can I spell that when I'm drunk? I don't know. Okay, here it is. So if you want to come and see our blue ash, look at its four-sided shoots. You can come and do that. You can search for these kinds of things pretty easily. We're trying to make this useful for sort of informal exploration of that plant collection. If you want to see something that is maybe relatively underutilized or difficult to find in landscapes, you might be able to just come up and see how it's doing, at least in Fort Collins. There aren't too many blue ash around, right? I mean,
Would you have to know the size of that tree?
that's an excellent question. I kind of roughly know, but we don't have accurate measurements in our inventory, and that's something that we want to improve.
The only three blue ash we know about are in one property right next to Washington Park in Denver.
I'm guessing it's 10 inches DBH, maybe 8 to 10 inches DBH.
I can look it down.
It's probably 30 feet tall or so.
Okay. Well, with
Yeah.
the checklist, it's still nice to know it's there.
We're gonna try to keep it and let it grow and nurture it. Yeah. What else? Anything else? So if you haven't been to the Heritage Arboretum on campus recently, if you've never been to this Arboretum on CSU's campus and you happen to find yourself in CSU, please come and visit, you know, if you're there for any other reason. And explore the collection, see what, you know, you can discern. We do have some hidden gems, I think we've been calling them. Susie and Max are here. They're working in the Arboretum over the summer, doing a lot of really good work, managing the landscape. Max is trying to help us improve and plan some educational programming for the Arboretum. And that's a really useful thing that we're hoping to expand in the future as well. So this inventory is good, it's functional. You can filter by stuff. If you want to see everything that, you know, we got from a particular nursery, you can see that stuff pretty quickly, pretty easily. So like I said, we're hoping to continue to build and grow and expand this collection and contribute in this property to this work of tree evaluation and tree diversity more broadly. I can tell you, I don't know how to advance my slide now. Oh, there we go. We have some really nice ginkgos. One from 1978, sort of the initial planting. The first planting we have records for is from 1978. So there's some decent sized ginkgos. We have a really nice Turkish filbert that has never been pruned and has beautiful structure, beautiful form. So if you're even looking for examples that could be illustrative for other people, that's a good place to find some of those. But I want to share our approach, which is pretty extensive, to evaluating these trees over time. This is just a snapshot of the Microsoft Access sort of database and form that we use for sort of tracking these trees. It was digitized somewhere in the past couple of decades. So we have those records pretty well sort of documented, and before that it was not digital. And you can see on the right, this is a summary report of all of those observations in a particular year. That report is over 1,100 pages long. So there's a lot of data in there, but at the same time, it's somewhat difficult to summarize and synthesize that much raw data because it's just so much coming at you all at once. It's in some ways kind of challenging to discern any clear trends or sort of takeaway messages. And we have over the past, over the history of this Arboretum and trial sort of program, published a number of publications and books that have attempted to sort of do that, distill some sort of recommendations from all of these observations. And that's good, but this is something that I would particularly like to sort of build on and improve on. I think there's some opportunities for us to maybe be a little bit more succinct in the amount of data that we collect, and also be a little bit quicker and faster and more accessible in terms of the insights that we're deriving from all of that data that we're collecting. And at the same time, all of this work has been happening, like I said, the theme of tree diversity has been something that we've been talking about as a profession for decades, but challenges remain, right? Have we solved the problem of tree diversity? No. How will we know when we've solved it? What's a reasonable expectation for Colorado? What level of tree diversity is adequate or sufficient for Colorado? What kinds of expectations should we have? Clearly, we don't exist in a part of the world that's floristically that diverse. So we're kind of at a limitation to begin with. We have a challenging environment. But those are some things that I've kind of been reflecting on and thinking about as I sort of observe all of this work. And this is just an illustration of maybe, despite all that work, an illustration of the way that it can be difficult sometimes, right, to derive some conclusions from all of these efforts. I got an email yesterday from someone asking about London Plane. And they said they've been poring over the new recommended tree list for the Front Range. And they see that the London plane is a recommended tree. They live in the northern part of the Front Range and they haven't yet discovered the few London planes that are growing in Fort Collins or in the rest of northern Colorado. And they can't make sense of it. And they want to know, like, how are we recommending something that I don't even see growing anywhere? This person went out and visited a bunch of nurseries in town. He said he visited, at least half a dozen nurseries and asked them this question. And the best answer he got was, well, things come and go in terms of popularity. That's true. Trees run in fashions, like a lot of other things. But there wasn't really a clear answer, right? Is this tree something that this person should be planting? And what might be the main considerations about whether his site is a good site or not? So how would you answer that person? Come to your front yard, do you have one?
I've killed many.
You've killed one. And do you know why? Why did they die?
Seemingly cold snaps, but
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
That's my assumption, like cold hardiness is probably the governing factor, but there could be other issues. Any other ideas? Fungal issues? Anthracnose, is that what you're thinking? Anthracnose resistance?
Need to be rooted in.
They need to be rooted in, so maybe the way you plant them in the spring, push a lot of growth. I've heard that informally as well. If you can push a lot of growth of the season, you'll get better cold hardness. That first year of installation. We have a really nice exclamation London plane, not in the sort of main arboretum on campus, but at the Hort Center. It's beautiful. I don't see any dieback in it. It has excellent structure. It's never been pruned. It's low branched. So there's one example of a success story.
Dan,
Yes.
I sent this one to Denver Forestry a few years ago. It's right by the Regis campus, and I admittedly don't know if it's a sycamore or London plane, but it's got to be 3.5, 4 feet across, and it's like 6 branches that are each 18 inches. It's in somebody's front corner of the garden.
There are some nice ones in Denver.
Yeah.
There really aren't any, to my knowledge, any really nice big ones in the northern part of the Front Range. Right, so we're a half a zone-ish colder. So location matters, right? There's enough regional, local, modest sort of variation across relatively short kind of spatial scales in Colorado that make, making recommendations even for the whole Front Range sometimes difficult. I know there was maybe some ruffled feathers with respect to Freeman maple on the recommendation list. They don't seem to do well in Fort Collins. Our pHs maybe are a little bit higher than some other cities. They seem to do fine in other places. So those are just some examples of the way in which we've made a lot of progress. We've learned a lot, but it can still be kind of difficult to synthesize and make clear recommendations to people. And that's what they're hungry for. Yeah.
On Grand Junction, they have a lot of sycamores. And the London plane seemed to be much more resistant to anthracnose and other diseases rather than the American sycamore. And
Yeah.
side by side, there's just a world of difference in the density of the canopy. So
That's a good observation, an excellent observation. Another thing that I need to write down. I probably won't, I'll probably forget it, but those kinds of observations are actually really useful. I mean, Grand Junction's a lot warmer, so maybe that speaks to the importance of cold hardiness with a lot there.
but that also speaks to some of the sycamores here in the metro area as well.
Maybe they're just not right for us.
Similar fashion.
Sure. So maybe we need to be more careful about choosing a London. Yeah, an appropriate London. Exclamation does look good. I think that's the one that has been recommended and promoted recently. So, that's useful. So, as we've been kind of thinking about, well, the importance of tree diversity, the challenges in making progress, and maybe some opportunities to be more systematic and consistent about the way we're observing trees, to remove some of the differences of opinion and subjectivity that might be involved, right? As a scientist, my first inclination, which admittedly could be right, could be wrong, is to collect data, is to try and be objective, to approach a question scientifically, right? That's the scientific method, when used well, when used properly, is an excellent way to answer questions objectively. And so in sort of trying to think about how we do tree evaluation at CSU, that's, maybe one thing that I would like to emphasize, I would like to prioritize, and I'd like to strengthen. That's something that we have been doing, but maybe there's some ways that we can make that process more transparent, more accessible, and also invite other people to participate in it. So in terms of our motivations for wanting to do this work, and maybe the motivations among all of you and other people in urban forestry for wanting to do this work, right? This is kind of different from an inventory. An inventory is often a management data set that, is a snapshot of the condition of an urban forest. And if we're honest with ourselves, the frequency at which our populations are re-inventoried is just not often enough. It's not high enough, it's not rapid enough for us to make good observations about survival and mortality and growth rates. It's a useful way to manage a large population, but it's not always the best research data set. That doesn't mean that an inventory couldn't be used for research applications if we increased our frequency of observations, right? That depends on resources and priorities. That's a challenge that you all have to manage, right? That's not something that I can control. But I will say that where I used to work, they re-inventoried their trees very frequently, sometimes as often as every 6 months. And we were able to use that data set to model growth rates, to fit really robust empirical models of growth rates to almost 100 different tree species that they were growing that were in their inventory data set. So there is a potential to use this data that you're collecting to drive scientific insights, and then to apply that to models that we can use for a whole variety of applications. We're thinking about managing the dynamics of an urban forest or projecting change in an urban forest. Those processes are important, right? Demographics are important. But that's not often possible, right? So maybe in terms of evaluation, we're talking about a smaller subset of trees that we're interested in learning more about. They're experimental, they're unproven, and we want to sort of systematically evaluate the outcomes of those tests. I think it's important to maybe try and establish a common baseline for how we approach this process, so that we're all comparing apples to apples. We're not comparing apples to oranges. But there could be other reasons for doing this on a smaller subset of trees. You might be more interested in sort of recognizing pest and disease problems early on for something that's untested or unproven. And you could, at least at a high level, identify some of the drivers that are affecting growth, condition, and mortality over time, which is useful. You might not be able to do that with every tree in your urban forest, but those insights could be helpful in some ways, right? About how trees perform in different locations with different levels of stewardship and associated with them, right? There could be an opportunity in this tree evaluation and tree observation work to encourage community members to participate in it in some way, right? You don't really need a PhD to do this. You need to have some basic skills. I think you need to be able to identify a tree. It would be helpful if you could diagnose problems, but I would say that's probably not critical. Most people, if you can identify a tree, can probably learn to do most of this work. And that could be valuable, right? Many of you are thinking about ways of engaging with your communities and making connections with your communities, building awareness and appreciation for trees amongst your communities. And this could be maybe one way to do that, right? There are lots of other ways to do it. And the last point there is just pointing to the fact that, this work can be useful for answering research questions, and then be used for modeling purposes, right? That can be helpful to scientists. So we sort of recognized the opportunity for us maybe to reformulate our approach to tree observation at CSU at the Arboretum, and applied for some funds from SHREF, which is associated with the nursery and greenhouse industry in Colorado, and they were generous enough to support this effort, this work. And so this is something that we've been thinking about and we've been working on. I want to share with you what we've done so far, and I'd like to get your feedback. So I'll try to be quick with the rest of this. So in terms of thinking about how to do tree evaluation or tree observation, how to monitor trees, right, in the landscape, particularly these species we're maybe a little bit more interested in. Turns out, like, we're not the first group of people to think about this question. There have been other groups who have thought carefully about how to approach this work, who have published resources to guide and inform projects like this, and that can be useful. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So I think these are helpful sort of pieces of information that we can rely on. So there's a reinventory protocol from Indiana University on the left, Laura Roman, some US Forest Service scientists published a couple of publications that are very detailed, that provide a lot of helpful information and recommendations about monitoring urban trees. Kind of in the middle there, if you don't have those two documents, you should take a look at them. They're definitely useful. And then the protocol for urban FIA is on the right. That document, that protocol is 500 pages long. It's very, very detailed. And that's obviously a limitation in some ways. It's going to be an excellent data set. I think once that program gets up and running, I'm sure we'll learn a lot from urban FIA plots in different cities around the US. But my observation about approaching tree evaluation is that it needs to be simple. It shouldn't be too complicated. We should collect enough data that we need. We should make the observations that we need to answer the questions that we're interested in, and nothing more. And so that's often the difficult question, is how to figure out what questions do we really want to answer? What do we really need to know about these species? And then how should that drive what we're observing, what data we're collecting? So we've been thinking through this and trying to make some recommendations. So this is sort of the set of observations that we have sort of settled on. And we would definitely welcome your feedback and input on whether this might be adequate or inadequate in different ways. So the 8 observations that are within that box is the set of required observations. Those are the mandatory fields, what's required, what's absolutely necessary to answer what we think are the most important questions, which is survival rates, mortality rates, growth rates, and tree condition. And how those vary among species, among site types and land use categories, which are associated with different levels of stewardship, right? And different site conditions, right? Different favorabilities as well. And then we have a set of 9 additional observations, which are optional, which are not mandatory, which are like good to have if the observer can assess those variables, right? But maybe not everyone is comfortable measuring the height of a tree or has the equipment to reliably measure the height of a tree. So not necessary, but nice to have. Yeah, Louis.
I was just gonna suggest we put it in the province that was available. That's important to find a good tree.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's something that we've been trying to explore, that we're thinking about in terms of cold hardiness as well. So that's an excellent point. Yeah, we need to figure out a way to maybe put that into the species information. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Any other quick observations? So this is a snapshot. You don't have to, digest all of this and respond to it now. In terms of the rating scales that we use for each of those variables, we've tried to be very detailed and in prescribing, a range of possible responses for each of those dimensions, and providing information to an assessor to help them sort of be consistent. So tree condition, for example, is one problematic rating, because if you use excellent, good, fair, poor, dead, or excellent, good, fair, poor, my good might be your fair, and Carrie's excellent might be, who knows, something else for someone else. So this rating scale has sort of been tested and piloted, and it showed good agreement between sort of an amateur evaluation and a sort of an expert evaluation. So these 5 categories mostly refer to the vigor of the crown, relates to foliage conditions, dieback, major branch loss. Those are things that people can intuitively understand and easily evaluate. So we can be maybe a little bit more consistent about how we're rating the performance of trees over time. And we tried to do this for every variable, tried to be as specific as we possibly can to make it easy for people to make observations. So what we're kind of working on is an outline for a larger process for collecting these observations for ourselves, but we're also interested in making this available to anyone else who might be interested in using it as well. So I've put some options for the data collection process on the bottom. We're using the Esri suite because that's what we use for our inventory, but I would like to be agnostic about data platforms. It really doesn't matter what you use to collect the data in some way, as long as the observations are consistent. and we're using the same fields, that's kind of essential. That'll help us to make comparisons a little bit more objectively, right? And we would like to be able to collect data not only from CSU, but from some of these other experimental plantings, these informal sort of evaluations that are happening across Colorado, and compile all of that data for synthesis, right? So that we can maybe learn a little bit more about location-based differences in performance in an objective way. And so what we're thinking about, the open source tools that we're thinking about using for those steps of the process are listed there. If you don't know R, it's just an open source like coding environment, initially used for statistics, but now pretty much used for everything. And Shiny is a way to build web-based dynamic applications using R or Python. So this would be a way for us then to display the results of our analyses instantly to anyone who's interested in looking at it. We'd like to build a dashboard where you could go any time of the day and go and look at the results from anyone who's participating in terms of, you know, the things that we're trying to answer: growth rates, conditions, survival, mortality rates in different locations for the species that we're testing, right? And that would hopefully inform and guide decisions that you're all making about what might work well for your environments, for your locations. So we've built an implementation of this, like I said, because we're using sort of the Esri suite for our inventory. We've built it in Esri just as a way to sort of work through the process ourselves. So this is just a snapshot of our observation form. So we have one point here. It's Platanus wrightii that Freddie gave us, and we planted it last fall, and it did not make it to the winter. That would be one thing that we would be interested in monitoring over time, though, amongst many other trees. So this is just an example for that particular tree. The observation form is on the right. We've got a couple of categories for general information, site information, and transformation. That should be very, very quick for anyone to fill out and to complete. And then an option to submit photos if there's some uncertainty about something, and room for comments, right? If people want to provide some extra detail about something that they observed. So we would like to, you know, once we've sort of worked through some last remaining small details, share this with all of you and solicit advice and comment and feedback on whether this is a right approach or a wrong approach in some ways, or ways in which this work might be made more useful to all of the informal efforts that are ongoing to sort of advance tree diversity and to observe new, interesting, unfamiliar tree species in this region. So I would like to ask all of you, you know, first, consider partnering with us if this is something that you're interested in, and you recognize the importance of this, and you also recognize opportunities for us maybe to share what we've learned more broadly. I'd like to ask you to consider working with us. I think we can accomplish more when we work together than when we work in isolation. So we're very open to other ways that we can help this work. So this is what we're thinking is useful, but if you have other ideas, we're absolutely open to hearing that as well. And also let us know what you need. What, you know, if we're interested in tree diversity, what are the other ways in which CSU can help? It might be in maybe doing observations and deriving insights from observations more systematically. It might be other things. We can help with publications. We can help with events. We want to support you. So I just want to sort of make that very clear that we're interested in helping all of the passion that exists for this work in all of your, you know, areas of influence. So please let us know if there are ways in which we can be a resource and a useful contributor to this work in other ways. So that's it. I don't know if anybody else has comments or feedback now, or we can also listen to Eric.
If they want to partner you, Dan, what would be the way, just to email you?
Yeah, write to us. I think we can share our list of fields and observations that we're planning to include and sort of into this framework right now. We'd love to get your feedback on that. If you have a small group of trees that you're evaluating that you want to work with us to monitor, please let us know and we'll work with you. My guess is that we'll roll out sort of trial version of this process. It'd be nice to work with some other partners who are doing this work in different locations with different species, might have different problems, just to see if it works. And we'll do the same on the CSU campus. And then we'll probably make some small tweaks, and then it'd be great to expand it as widely as possible. Yeah.
Are you, so you have at the beginning of the presentation, the graph for the Liriodendron.
Yeah.
Are you looking at compound stressors? Because I feel like that's what happens here is trees get like kicked in the pants over and over and then they finally. Yeah.
So you're talking about like decline complexes,
Yeah,
syndrome.
Like you have, core planting, and then you have a freeze event, like, a late freeze or early freeze, and then, on top of it, that site is really dry. And so it feels like it's never. a
Scientifically,
easy
yeah.
Story.
Yeah. How could we, and maybe one thing to then think about is how could we, do that scientifically or experimentally? This traditional experimental approach is to remove all sources of variability except one. We're going to look at one dimension at a time,
Exactly.
because that's what we can tolerate, that's what we can think about. And systems are so complex that it can be difficult to develop new knowledge when you're looking at too much.
Right.
So you've got to maybe strike a balance between detail and real world representation or whatever, right? So maybe there's a couple of other factors that we can include. Trees, maybe we could look at, the dynamics of cold hardiness for trees that have been stressed by one other thing over time, and maybe a couple of other factors, right? But when you start adding too much into the mix, then it's like impossible to say anything, which we absolutely don't want to do. We want to be able to say something, to learn something. But that's an excellent question. I think we want our work to be applicable. So yeah, if you have recommendations like that, please shut them up. Yeah.
I was paying attention, but my brain also started to wander through the ginkgo. So back in 1978.
Yeah.
What kind of diameter roughly might that tree be?
That tree is probably like 15 inches diameter. It's not super big.
50 years.
Yeah. That, we don't have information about the source of that tree or whether it was a cultivar or not, so we don't have as much detail about the source of that particular ginkgo, but we have some others. One other one that's similar in size is Fairmont. I don't even know if you can buy Fairmont anymore. We have Princeton Century that are younger and probably similar, their size is smaller, the growth rate's probably similar. Yeah. Gary.
So I don't really have a direct question, but I just want to make sure that I am understanding, like, in terms of Kyla's question too. So, in terms of like the research group, like a lot of the science for measuring these things that we've always kind of assumed about tree species, right? It is brand new, right? Like we're still even looking at different ways to determine cold hardness in terms of these physiological metrics, right? And so a lot of the work that you're doing in the research program is actually figuring out that science, right? And then once we kind of have some good techniques for that, we can start throwing variables into the mix, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, that kind of, you'd think we would have actually done that a long time ago, but we've kind of always relied on people's just stories, like what has worked and what hasn't, right? Like,
yeah, I think both are valuable, and I think I'm arguing maybe for a slightly more systematic approach to like the informal evaluation process. I think we can learn a lot. There's a lot of value in that. That helps inform maybe the more rigorous scientific piece in a way that's useful. There should be synergy between those two things. But yeah, you're right. We kind of have to take it systematically, work out the methods first, make sure we can rely on the measurements, and then we can maybe add complexity into the studies and maybe answer more interesting questions. That's the frustrating part about the scientific approach, is that it's kind of slow too. It's not as fast as you would like it to be. But it can be more useful and applicable when our questions are sharpened by your problems. So I think you can help us make sure that we're working on the right things. And make sure that we're not wasting time of answering, interesting scientific questions that maybe have no relevance. A lot of the cold hardiness methods have been worked out. For specialty crops, there's a lot of cold hardiness work on grape, for example. But the anatomy of grape buds versus tree buds is, pretty variable. And the diversity of things that we're looking at means that applying those methods to new species isn't always super straightforward. The same goes for water use. There's a lot of studies looking at water use for some trees and a lot of other plants, but not enough empirical measurements of the species that you're interested in the locations where you work. So, regionalizing some of that work, I think is valuable too. Have I talked enough? I think I've talked enough. Okay. I think Eric is up. Yeah, I'll be here. I'll hang around. If you want to talk more, let's talk. Yeah.
And give a little 5-minute break here. Then Eric's gonna get rolling. He wants to pick up a tree. And not bringing these back to Fort Collins. One's nursery professionals, and is going to be talking about all things trees and tree growing, and give it over to him.
Perfect. Thank you all for having me. This is kind of a cool experience for me, kind of my first big speech, so bear with me. We're gonna have fun and keep this light. Definitely ask questions along the way. It's gonna be kind of a refresher on the biology side and selection side here to start. And then the ultimate goal of this presentation is how you all can be successful acquiring the trees that you need for planting projects and things like that. We talk about diversity. Dan gave me an awesome intro into where this conversation's going, about looking at selections and how do we get new trees and how do we create this urban, diverse urban forest that we're after. It seems easy, but obviously we know all the complications and speed bumps associated with that. So let's dive in here. I hope everyone on the digital end can hear me okay.
Thumbs up. Thumbs up.
Thumbs up, perfect. See if I can get this to advance. There we go. All right, so we're going to do a quick little touch on selections and propagation. Dan, again, really went through how do we select a tree? What are we looking for? What are the criteria? I might divert from some of those things CSU's really looking at because aesthetics seem to be a big piece of the puzzle, especially coming from the nursery side of things. We're going to look at who's growing trees, what is the growing cycle, and what is the timeline associated with that? And what is the financial risk associated to the grower and liability to the grower with that long-term growing investment? And then finally, we're going to follow up with, again, how can we be successful acquiring the trees that we need for our planting projects? All right, so species versus selection. So when we talk species, we're generally talking about something that was grown from seed. Could be an isolated bottlenecked seed source that has specific characteristics, or it could be very wild genetics, things like seed coming out of the forest for ponderosa or Colorado blue spruce. Selections, our glorious hot wings maple here. It is a Tatarian maple, but obviously selected for those incredible red Samaras. Through a selection process, was it just the red Samaras that were selected for, or was it also hardiness, structure, size, things like that? So when we go through the selection process, what are we actually getting? I just wanted to kind of give an intro. Everyone knows Dutch elm disease. This is nothing new, but this is like a classic example of nature selecting trees for us, right? So through the mid-1900s, Dutch elm disease made its way through the US. Detrimental to our American elm. However, roughly about 1 in every 100,000 elm trees had natural resistance to the Dutch elm disease. Basically nature's way of saying, here's a tree that can survive for you. These are now our American elm varieties and cultivars that we have in the nursery that have proven themselves somewhat worthy for Dutch elm disease resistance. However, another curveball, these poor trees can't catch a break. Now we have the European elm scale. So maybe American elm is not our top choice anymore. We're using a lot of the Asiatic and David elms, which are showing resistance more or less on both of those. Obviously, nothing's perfect, but that's the direction that we've had. So I just wanted to talk about when we talk about selection, nature is doing one piece for us. Human intervention is the second half. So other criteria that we're selecting, obviously the aesthetic traits are a big piece. Leaf colors, canopy shape, overall size, things like seedless and thornless varieties like our Kentucky coffee tree or honey locust. CSU seems to really be pushing the envelope here on the hardiness and resistance side of things. Very important, obviously. That's how we're going to have longevity in these trees. Say there's a difference between homeowner landscaping versus municipality forestry. Everyone loves pretty cool cultivars in their backyard, something they can tell their friends about. Obviously in the urban forest, it's a little bit different scenario. Would like to emphasize though that hardiness and resistance piece in rootstock, and we'll touch base on that here as we kind of go into propagation. And then overall diversity, right? Groups like Plant Select are kind of pushing the envelope on introducing non-native species, but going through the trial process of verifying, its lack of invasiveness, overall hardiness, things like that. So these are kind of the criteria of which we're selecting upon for tree species that we sell through the nursery. So types of propagation, again, you all have been through biology classes, so I'm not going to dwell on these things super hard, but I think it's important to understand the complicated nature of producing a tree. It's fantastic to find a beautiful specimen that meets the criteria of selection. How does it get propagated and how does it become available to you all? So seed grown trees. You generally have natural genetic diversity. You'll see this often in Colorado blue spruce. You'll have bluer selections, greener selections, short fat ones, tall skinny ones, and that is just general natural diversity in the genetics. Also hardiness, I mean, that's part of this trialing process. If you line out 10 of a species, you may see differences in drought stress, water tolerance, things like that. But these seedlings are really ideal for identifying selections because we get to pick and choose the genetics that are expressing themselves. The other piece would be hybrids. There are natural and intentional hybrids. Populus acuminata or landsleaf cottonwood being a plains and narrow leaf natural hybrid that kind of gives us some benefits of both trees. Intentional hybrids, a lot of those beautiful, colorful, fancy maples that you see, truncatum, platanoides crosses, things like that, are intentionally crossed for different expressions. Rooted cuttings. Shout out to Louis. This is a picture, and this is his tree growing here. Rooted cuttings are, which was brought up earlier today with our champion trees, acquiring scion wood, taking cuttings, bringing this vegetative matter back. What do we actually do with it? So there's kind of two ways to go about handling it: softwood and hardwood cuttings, semi-hardwood, semi-softwood cuttings. There's a lot of gray area in what time of year you cut, and that's very species oriented. What you actually do is you create a genetic specimen clone that has the same rootstock, same top crown, genetically pure all the way through. And there's advantages to that because we might be selecting for hardiness. If you take and we're going to touch on grafting next, if you take a cutting of a tree and you graft it onto a rootstock of unknown variety, are you really achieving the same hardiness with mixing and matching that Franken tree? Another thing to consider is, are we doing ourselves an injustice by creating clones of native trees, perhaps, our Populus sargentii? This is known as Sargent Straight or Geronimus, cultivar Geronimus, is a fantastic cottonwood. It grows better for most tree growers. It grows with a straighter trunk. It has a fantastic canopy. It is male, so it is seedless. But now we have actually isolated our population of native cottonwood down to one genetic clone. So are we potentially inviting in pest and disease opportunity into our native species? Do we need to be looking at other male varieties that we can clone and insert some genetic diversity back into those species as well? And then lastly here on propagation would be grafted trees. There's several different types of grafts that are used, but basically you are mixing and matching a desired tree with some sort of rootstock. Rootstock can come in multiple ways. You can actually get cloned rootstock. This is really popular in edible apple trees and things like that. They are given with a rootstock name, so it's actually a cultivar name on the rootstock. Rootstocks are developed for disease resistance, drought tolerance. In the edible apple world, they actually dwarf the overall canopy size of an apple tree, so you can buy a dwarf Honeycrisp, a semi-dwarf Honeycrisp. That's actually dictated by the rootstock that's being used. Rootstock can also come from seedlings. So in the greenspire linden world, they use a bud graft. So they actually grow a little leaf linden, straight species as a seedling, graft on a bud, allow that top growth to persist until the bud attaches itself, grows up, they remove the top part of the original seedling, and you're left with greenspire top and seedling bottom. It's a fantastic way to produce a tree, but again, you have variability in the rootstock. And when we start talking about hardiness and resistance to insect and disease, to drought, perhaps something to consider is consistency in the rootstock. Another example of how this is a problem would be Vanderwolf limber pine. Beautiful conifer, widely desired, maybe a lack of availability in the market today. But that is a limber pine generally grafted on a white pine rootstock. Southwest white pine, eastern white pine. In Colorado, if it's a Southwest white pine rootstock, you're gonna have a lot more viability, cold hardiness, drought tolerance comes from our region versus an eastern white pine. We've all probably had some experience with an eastern white pine in Colorado. It's usually disappointing. So when you acquire your trees from a nursery, and I've worked in a nursery for over 7 years now, I don't necessarily even know what rootstock are on these trees. This will come back around full circle here as we start talking big picture about success in Colorado. But for the sake of this conversation, rootstock is an incredibly important piece of our cultivar tree selection. Lastly, everyone's probably seen a bad graft also. That's part of your tree inspection process. That's a vulnerable spot on a tree also. So growers, we don't give enough credit to the tree growers because they ultimately are the ones who are making these trees available for our use. Through the nursery that I've worked at for the last 4 years, we sold 75,000 trees along the Front Range of Colorado. That's through one nursery outlet. I hear varying numbers up and down the Front Range. It can peak at around 250,000 trees a year. That's an incredible amount of tree material going in all the new subdivisions development east of I-25. It really is a remarkable thing that we're able to supply this many trees to the market. So shout out to the growers, and this will kind of make that a little bit more clear about the complexity of the supply chain. So kind of the life of a tree starts with the liner grower, and this goes back to making an initial selection. That selection has to be identified of which means of propagation is used to propagate that tree and create a duplicate and a clone of it. Is it a graft? Is it a rooted cutting? Is it a bottleneck seed source perhaps? But the liner growers basically produce a baby tree. Something that a field grower then can put into their field. Most nurseries are separate. Most nurseries focus on liners or they focus on field growing. There is some collaboration between parent companies producing liners for themselves, or some smaller nursery outlets do a lot of in-house propagation and line out their own trees in the field also. But typically, nurseries stick to their specialty, and a liner grower is going to produce this tree for production in the field, either as a bare root specimen or as a small container or grow bag style tree. But this is labor heavy. I mean, if we're looking at, rooted cuttings, grafting, especially grafting is a very hands-on, there is no mechanized way of grafting. That is hands and knives and rubber bands and things like that. And also the initial pruning on a tree is a crucial stage as well. So you can buy a tree as a whip. That'll be this left picture here. Generally they're graded when you buy them, but as a whip, that would be 1 year growth typically for that whip. The field grower would snip that top, push side nodes, and start shaping that into a tree. You can jump ahead and get a little bit of a head start with a lightly branched or a small branch tree. Typically, these are somewhere in the realm of 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch caliper coming into the field grower. And this is usually about a 2 to 3 year process, 2-year process. Having rootstock, grafting onto rootstock, or rooting a cutting and growing that tree up. But these guys are really what dictates how healthy is that tree going to be for its growth. Vigor, I mean, if a tree gets stunted at this stage, you're going to have stunted growth for a while until it's able to grow out of that. So these guys really are the superheroes in producing the beginning stage of a tree. I will say also the last piece on this will come to fruition here at the end as well. Contract grows versus standard production. Basically, a grower has to look in a crystal ball and determine how many trees should I grow this year? What varieties? It really is unfortunate they haven't been given more insight from people like us in this room to know what they should and need to grow. It's a lot of financial liability, producing a lot of something that doesn't make it to the field after this. So keep that in mind as we continue talking. So now we're to our field growers. So they take those liners that were produced and line them in their field for traditional production. And what we're looking at here, this would be for balled and burlap production. So these would be machine dug with a spade, dropped into a cage of burlap, and stored and healed above ground for distribution to the job site when they're to be planted. Depending on variety of tree, this could be a 2 to 5 year process. Potentially longer when you start talking about things like bristlecone and Bosnian pine and things like that. Some trees take to being dug in both spring and fall. Some trees can only be dug in spring. So there's kind of a big lump sum of an inventory available somewhere in that February to May timeline when all the trees across the country are being dug. These field growers really dictate what trees are available to us in the landscape and municipality world. With this type of timeline that we're talking about, it was mentioned earlier, 4 to 5 years, maybe we can have a tree from cutting to finished. That's without hiccups, that's without rootstock production, that's without trialing in the field. There's no real way to catch up on inventory. It is what it is until we kind of change that at the front end stage. Location of growers. I think is crucial to this conversation. Oregon grows a fantastic tree. Well, it's kind of a no-brainer. They get rain year round, they get a nice cloudy, warm, 30-degree winter. They just grow a fantastic product. But has that tree been spoiled to the point that it's lost some of its resilience to the Front Range of Colorado? How quickly does it adapt to our climate? Sun scald is a major issue on a lot of varieties of trees. Have they built up that tolerance to be able to be proficient in our climate? So anyways, this is a shout out to the growers. And again, this is just kind of creating a baseline here of how we get a tree to market. And this is the process that it takes to get there. It's a lot of hands. When people complain about the price of a tree, it's like, well, you know what? This has been touched by a lot of people. It's been shipped on a semi-truck across the country. There's been a lot of liability to the growers along the way. So I think we owe the growers every penny that we give them for these trees. Last piece here, again, something you're all familiar with, but B&B versus container, and then grow bags. Grow bags is something that hasn't really been an overly common product, but potentially has some validity in this conversation. B&B is our standard tree. Again, dug spring or fall, potentially more stress to the tree as the roots are being severed while digging. Not always massive roots. Different species of trees have different risk as far as digging. Honey locust, hackberry, incredible root systems that are just vigorous and really a pain to dig and do take a lot of stress in the digging process. And something I'd like to challenge you all with, because this has been the norm, is the root structure actually better on a B&B tree? Because the root structure is only as good as the liner that was put in the ground. And when we have some, potential pushback on container trees, circling roots, it's root bound. Yes, those are real issues. But what if it's a 5-gallon conifer that's planted into the ground with a root bound constricted root system to produce a ball and burlap tree in 5 years? It's dug with a constricted root system already in that hole. So unfortunately, perhaps until you peel back the burlap or dig into the soil of that tree, you actually don't know the actual root structure on it. And if you're actually gaining any benefit by going with a balled and burlap versus a container, or what I'd like to push later on is the potential for grow bags. Obviously, issues with containers, just touched on that. The last being potting mix, which I think is, it has its advantages for growing, right? It's a soft medium. It allows root structure to develop quick. It allows water to drain and nutrients to drain through quick, where you're allowed to produce a fast growing tree. But when you take that potting mix and actually plant it into its planting hole with a native soil, now you have a soil interface, and you have a potting mix that's designed to be watered every day with a native soil that's not. An establishment of that tree, potting mix to native soil, takes a more diligent hand as far as irrigation and watering goes, to have success in rooting on that tree. So that would be my biggest complaint as far as a container tree goes. The grow bag is something that's a little bit different. That's what's pictured here. This is actually production up in Oregon. So instead of a black plastic pot, it's a fibrous bag material that actually allows light and air penetration for root pruning. So you do avoid a lot of the circling roots and girdling roots that are issues with containers. They'd still use potting mix, so you're still going to have that issue, but I will say you get a more fibrous, robust root system in a bag. And I think it's a great option for municipalities, especially in midsummer when lack of inventory is available on B&B. Another issue is no one really knows how to plant and handle a grow bag. So there's going to be a learning curve with doing that too. So nursery suppliers and things like that would be able to kind of teach that lesson. But it is, most people have no idea, and you start ripping that thing out, you're just going to destroy it. You actually cut them off. So it's a little bit different. All right, so all of this together, the complexity of producing a tree and producing diversity in our urban forests is a long process. And I'd like to really kind of spend a little bit more time talking about this because I'm passionate about this. I want to see, being a plant salesperson, I've been given, I don't know how many plant lists, and to go down the list and just be like, no, not available. Not a chance. Are you crazy? Everything. I mean, it really is remarkable. You know, someone sends a plant list in. It's for, 128 big tooth maple, Rocky Mountain Glow, and like, we're lucky if we get 20 to distribute to 10 different people every year. So there is a way around this, and this is the perfect audience to present this to, because you are the drivers in this room. You are the ones who create the tree lists. You are the ones who are telling us up and down the front range what the approved trees are and recommended trees are. Well, now let's get them into the production cycle. So I mentioned a crystal ball earlier. Growers have to look in the crystal ball. Wholesale nursery suppliers have to look in the crystal ball and somehow gather reasonable inventory to bring in for supply to landscapers and contractors and municipalities. Currently, nurseries are actually looking at booking 2025 trees as we speak. So growers are out in their field. Trees are going to finish calipering here shortly. They're going to be calipering their field, measuring their trees, getting inventory counts on what they have available, presenting that to nurseries to order. By about September, allocations come in, and trees are pretty much, for the most part, big orders are dictated and already booked. There is a second chance to add, specialty items or additions on certain species, but this is if we have something that we call a purchase order or some sort of insight from the people planting on, and I'm not talking about, Mary Ann's backyard. We have trees for that. I'm talking about large scale projects where you're talking potentially hundreds of trees. Those numbers are a difference maker. So a purchase order or some sort of insight from the municipality or governing agency involved in these plantings allows additions of trees to be booked by the nurseries to be brought into those sites. They have to be above ground when you guys are ready to plant. They have to be balled and ready. So this allows the nursery to get a jump on that. Also the timeline on the project. I know there's variability in every project. Curb and gutter's 2 months behind. We haven't even graded out this area yet. Rough timelines are important. Again, I've talked about spring and fall dug potential on bald and burlap trees. Well, say it's a fall job. We might just push bringing those trees in into the fall. If we can do a fall dig, gets you fresher stock, and potentially a better product to be planted at that time. But most importantly, it's a communication piece. We need to know what you guys want to add to your planting plan or what you're taking out. Honey locust example, Freddie was in the nursery, we were walking around, he goes, "Did you hear they're cutting honey locust?" I was like, oh my God. Things like that. I just brought in 280 skylines, I'm gonna be screwed if I'm sitting on 280 skylines at the end of the year and we're no longer planting those. So that is a financial liability and risk of the nursery. The more insight you pass along to your supplier, they're gonna bring in less of that species and include more of the species that you want to plant. Again, brings availability to the hot topic, hot plant. Fashion of plants is ever changing, and it's hard to keep up with trends anyways, and it's even harder in the plant world. And once again, just to drive the point home, you are the ones that drive this. And I'm happy after this to pass along outlets that you can use to get this information to your suppliers. But really, you dictate what is grown, and that's going to go all the way back to that initial liner grower at the beginning of the food chain. Another thing I'd like to challenge you all with, City of Fort Collins does a great job with this, but a holding yard. This is a means for you all to bring in field direct trees to your municipality. Again, this is going to require space and infrastructure and things like that. But you're able to actually get trees at a discounted rate. You're able to choose the grower and the location that these trees come from, and it helps you dictate your production plan. Freddie, again, we talk all the time. They bring about 600 trees in through the city of Fort Collins, hold in their holding yard, use those trees with different contractors to install, some in-house, some out of house. Again, it gives just so much more control on what tree goes into the ground for you. And again, it's just a critical piece that I'd like to challenge you all with, because I think it's a huge opportunity that's being missed quite often. However, it is a living product. It has a shelf life and is perishable. So you need to have infrastructure, irrigation, perhaps an employee that's in charge of maintaining these trees and watching health on these. Typically, we like to say leave it to the nursery professionals, but it's not rocket science, obviously. There's plenty of means for all of you to do a holding yard and direct ship as well. Talking on substitutions. God, the dreaded substitution. So again, I love helping people be successful planting the plant that they want to plant. But there comes a time, perhaps this time of year in July, we are through a couple species. There's not going to be available for months, if not next year. We need to appropriately finish a job for the landscaper contractor's sake, for the municipality's sake. We have to make substitutions. So a way I like to think about things, there's niches, right? And there's kind of your three big categories of trees: your shade, your ornamental, and your conifer. They have different heights and shapes. There's different site and environmental requirements. Is it a wet zone? Is it a dry zone? If we can start thinking about trees with that kind of mentality, it makes substitutions much easier. Because now you're swapping in the shape and size and environmental condition versus a name. Project delays are costly for everyone, and honestly, it's probably not as big of a deal on the municipality side. The landscapers and contractors are pinching pennies and flying by the seat of their pants. And the moment that they get delayed, you're going to potentially ruin relationships and cause a lot of frustrations. So this is an easy way to keep things moving. It allows your contractors and landscapers to retain partners with you as well. And I'm not a municipality forester, right? These are things I've learned through the trade and through my years about how these conversations go. But again, I think these are simple solutions to help you overall achieve a diverse urban canopy, thinking about canopy percentages versus individual species in each location, more of a big picture thought on a, site to site, conversation. All right, so coming back around, again, this has been a good topic today and, come up a couple times. Collectively in this room, we can identify some of the winners up and down the Front Range. And I think CSU's grading profile there, ranking profile is just fantastic. Kind of creates a uniform system that we can all use to get a clear answer on. But group feedback, opportunities like this to talk about individual trees and certain species that we want to push forward, or just a remarkable specimen that for some reason didn't get water for 8 months and it's just thriving out here. These are the conversations that we really need to have. And potentially get those in the hands of CSU for trials and testing. Communication to growers. Want to circle back on this point just a touch. So I think there's actually opportunity here where individual municipalities or collective organizations like this can actually go directly to liner growers and have propagation schedules created. I think we can, if we go directly to them and can give them the opportunity to be successful by doing large contract grows with guaranteed money, they're going to jump on it in a heartbeat. Things like Choice City Elm, they're starting to pop up more and more. We're starting to see a few liner growers producing that, but that's taken a long time to get to that point. Again, something that I get like 20 of a year and get asked for 100. Eventually we'll see that production line catch up. But in the meantime, why don't we push the species and cultivars and selections that we want to see? You all depend on a nursery to be successful. We'll help the nursery be successful also. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a money game and, it's an unfortunate piece, but the nurseries need to make money, pay their people. The production line is long and very hands-on and labor intensive in the tree world. So do the best you can to support your local nursery and wholesale supplier. I mean, it will pay itself back tenfold with the trees that you guys are planting in our diversity conversation. And then the last piece is this purchase orders and tagging. If you can get people in the nursery throwing ribbons on and tagging for projects ahead of time, getting these purchase orders in early to nurseries for following years. Again, these are just ways to get your hands on the trees that you actually want, potentially avoiding the substitution conversation, or when you're hands-on in the nursery tagging for a project, it allows you to get ahead of the substitution conversation and be more prepared for it when the project actually comes. I think this is something that you all should take advantage of as much as possible, and it just helps guarantee your success. That is the bulk of my conversation. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, one of the products that we procure from other people occasionally is a grow bag that's grown with native soil.
Okay.
And just curious, it's relatively new to us. What do you think of those and how do they stack up advantages and disadvantages versus some of the other products you talked about?
Yeah, I love the grow bag. There's actually a slide in there. I'm doing a little side project with grow bags, and I think there's some great validity to the root structure that you get. I am not familiar with grow bags and native soil. Typically, native soil complicates production because you don't have consistency, and growers like consistency for irrigation. Now you're on a separate zone from maybe something that isn't a potting mix because you're watering less frequently compared to a potting mix over here. So most growers won't dabble with that. I think that's a huge potential for restoration and reclamation style projects where potentially they're going into a site where they're not going to receive irrigation. Native soil would be very valid in that. But I have some pictures I could share of root structure of some of these grow bags and what you get compared to a black nursery pot. I think the bag is underutilized and has big potential.
Thank you.
Grow bag follow up.
Yeah.
So back in the 90s, they had field grown in-ground grow bags. You're talking only grow bags above surface.
Correct, because you need that light and air interface to get that pruning of the root.
Right.
In ground, they're either going to grow through that bag and you have tons of root disturbance, Or they might circle and not go through.
Yeah, they were jumping, so. So I'm glad they above ground this, it sounds like a different material possibly.
It's like a woven style tarp material. Company that I'm using on the side actually is working on a very environmental solution associated with it that has a chemical in it that breaks down over a timeline and you're left with zero microplastic. Really kind of a cool environmental twist on the whole thing. They are in the R&D on that. They actually had it going too fast. The bag disappeared in 2 months. That isn't gonna work. So now they need to slow that down and get us to 2 or 3 years. But yes, totally different material.
Again, on throwback, in the south at least, I worked with a bunch of nurseries that were ground bag. And they had specialized pools that would pop them out and the roots would just break off. So you pull them out of the ground, they'd be perfectly set, and they were really successful. I know 2 or 3 nurseries in Louisiana, Mississippi. It's a different environment, but yeah, that's what a lot of stuff is moving to the south.
I think timing of that is important, right? So I touched on it briefly with the B&B tree. They're literally digging and severing the roots when they dig that tree. Well, as soon as you do big intentional severing of roots, you're actually stunting the tree. It has to recover from that and heal itself. So the idea with a grow bag is it's slow and light damage to the roots. As soon as it hits the edge, then it creates a more fibrous root system versus a big severing event where a larger percentage or larger portion of the roots are severed at one point in time. The above ground grow bag is having light pruning on those roots continuously. So, yeah, again, in our climate, I don't think we would want to try and dig a bag out of our plate anyway, so. Yeah.
Not fully shifting grow back under the soil line, because the cages, the wire cages, the log. We've been running into a ton of them, because there's some obvious, things about it, but they're planted just in the ground and that they are like that cage intact. Now, you'd be surprised at how many, it's obvious it's gonna inhibit the tree's growth, right? What do you know about the proper, if you can't get it out of the cage, cutting it, or it's, taking it off entirely, or is that balance struck?
Well, I mean, obviously that's a poor planting practice. And you're honestly not going to notice damage for a long period of time. The idea is when you have those larger roots that start protruding out the side of that original root ball, is you can actually have girdling on that root when it grows into the cage. Perhaps in a wetter environment in the US where there's significant rainfall, that cage might actually rust out quick enough that it's not an issue. Here in Colorado, I would not put any money on that. So unfortunately, I've seen a lot of warranty and replacement issues associated with that. I don't have any personal experience, however, actually going in and doing any aftermath tweaks on that. But ideally, in a perfect scenario, if you could dig back down around that root ball and get about that top half or top 2/3 of that cage off, or at least snip it with bolt cutters and release some of the tension on those individual squares, you might be able to save that situation. But that's a lot of effort and labor for every tree. So I'll leave that decision making to you. Yeah. Yeah.
Eric, could you just expand a little bit on the potted soil versus native, and like what would be more ideal? This one would be.
Yeah, so when I say potting mix, I'm generally referring to something that's heavy in peat moss or coconut coir. Usually added perlite, perhaps a light mix of compost and some basic nutrients or fertilizer, versus native soil. Native here being heavy clay, native in Oklahoma where a lot of oaks come from, heavy sand. So native just being different, but typically, I mean, there's a reason why you can't lift a B&B tree by hand. That native soil is incredibly heavy and its water holding capacity is huge. Versus actually a 2-inch bagged tree, I can lift by myself. So the sheer weight of what that soil can hold as far as water is drastically different. And again, the idea being potting mix and production situations, you want to be able to water almost every day. The water is able to drain through it, can only hold so much percentage of water, allows you to add fertilizer and pump production and grow a faster root system. Just the variables are taken out and you have more control. Native on a B&B, Again, it's gonna be more resilient to intervals on watering and things like that. Anything else specific? That's good. Okay, okay.
It's kind of a larger question, than your presentation, and maybe a possible topic for a future, of the meeting. But do you have any thoughts on how to improve tree diversity and tree quality in a retail setting? A lot of what we do is we buy wholesale. A lot of what Moa does, they need a tree is to go out to Home Depot or whatever they have here or stuff. And so it's very limited in options. We're just going out and buying a tree and not to solve.
Yeah.
So I guess if your thoughts on that.
Oh, the big box store conversation, that's a whole realm, and there's actually, I mean, there's nurseries that just specialize in being growers for big box stores, and, it's really, I hate that market, nurseries paid off, basically for every plant sold, there's no liability for the big box store to keep that plant alive, because they don't make their cut until it's sold, and there's just a lot of really poor horticultural practices associated with the big box stores. I don't know at this point in time anything off the top of my head of how we can change the big box stores. However, a lot of our local garden centers and nurseries are really good about keeping up with the extension, CSU extension and things like that, and providing information that are documents from the extensions, proper ways to plant, the new approved tree list, things like that. So I'd say, we're at this point in time, we have to lean heavily on the garden centers. Big box store, I mean, I'd be happy to see that whole thing just go away, but
Also providing affordable trees, like that's why people go.
Yeah.
but is an affordable tree worth it if it has no survival problem?
No, but what I'm saying is like programs in the front of Colorado, for example, where we are providing trees that are not actually short prices.
Yes.
You have a chance at fighting that.
Absolutely. And I think those liner growers would be a great contact for getting a lot of that smaller caliber material into kind of the market and going that route. Absolutely.
I have lots of questions, but I will try to keep it short, I promise. So 75,000 trees you guys did just this past year. Of those totals, how much could you break it down by demographic of how many of those trees went to developers, how many went municipal, how many went golf course and or other? Yeah.
Not off the top of my head, I could probably pull a report similar to that, but I'd say 2/3 plus are under the commercial category. Large scale development, multifamily home structures, the Amazons, the new Amazon buildings, all up and down the Front Range are a couple hundred trees a pop. It's actually really cool. Then that other third is gonna be broken up more into, kind of your residential, light commercial, street side, things like that.
So in terms of that, are you guys, I know the report comes obviously with code requirements, things like that.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing any kind of training or kind of like follow up with these developers, is like how, like not planting trees with wire baskets and or like trying to really kind of just guarantee that like longevity of your product in that market?
Not as much as all of us in this room would probably like. Personally, when I'm asked and having the opportunity to speak or talk about those things, absolutely. For the most part, I mean, you start talking like Brightview's largest landscape company in the country, publicly traded, employs thousands of people. They do all of that in-house with their in-house structure. A lot of HTB employees. No, there's literally no system in place probably to monitor consistency and proper techniques, other than the biggest piece that they have is the warranty liability associated with it. So most contractors hold a 1-year warranty on install. If they are installing completely terribly and it's just trash, well, they're gonna get to buy every single one of the streets. So there is some financial incentive to do it right, but who's telling them what's right? Yeah. Good stuff.
Well, I proposed state law to, if anyone plants something with a wire basket, kind of catapult at the edge of Miami border. Catapult them into like.
It's just planning order.
Greedy.
Yes.
So, I kind of have more as a question for the group, but you might want to give some input. So, I cut my planting teeth in California, all container trees, mostly 15s. So Brian Kemp and Ed Gilman have done a lot of root pruning research, and I have seen such great success where you just hack that, you know what, out of those roots cleanly and nicely, and those trees survive. That kind of contradicts a little bit what you say, but I'm wondering if that's because it's a different soil, different weather. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I was going to ask about, you know, the grow bags too, always in the ground. And then, you know, the roots were pruned when you pulled them up. And so those were successful. Has anybody done any major root pruning or root washing, Bonnie Appleton's work? Anybody?
Yeah, we had some that were in-ground root bag grows, we tried to hickory, and it just was not. You just get big circle on those. And I think that's the big difference is on containerized versus bag a lot of times. Just look at the circular bottom of the bag, right? It's not to stop that further. That's what you can prove now. You can cut off the bag. On a black cotton, it goes all the way around.
Right.
Not that it's not this huge root usually. It's usually smaller material. I think that's the biggest sort of talk about B&B versus those in-ground bags or containerized, the size of the roots that are being pruned, and that's one of the biggest things you'll see with the transplant shop. Why that difference is when you beat the heck out of a containerized plant versus you beat the, you know, you plant a B&B perfectly, you have very different success, and it just comes down to water. That's what soil interface is our biggest issue.
Yeah, you can't even buy a B&B in California. My first time ever planting one was in Chicago on a tree, you know, on a volunteer tree planting thing, and it was crazy. But yeah, so it's definitely different. The other thing I was going to say was that we also planted a much smaller caliber tree, so the roots were not that way. And you know, I'm here, nobody stakes their trees, but you know, we double and triple stake every tree we plant in California because they only this big around, right? So I think that's a difference too, that the roots aren't that big.
And that's what the conversation around tree diversity moves back to, in addition, hey, what are you willing to plant? Right, it goes beyond what is available. What are you willing to make available, right? If I make you ask you a 2-inch caliber tree, then you're limiting yourself to a 2-inch caliber tree. You say, I can plant a bunch of bare root whips of this and produce it in 3 years. Hey, now you got the tree you wanted in 3 years instead of 7.
Right.
And you plant something that's going to establish quicker, but you have to be willing to deal with more higher mortality in particular by snapping it off. So there's always a give and take.
Right.
But I think that's a very important conversation to maybe continue on to with our nursery partners too. Hey, what can we do?
Yeah, and also, by the way, for your first presentation, awesome. Awesome.
I just wanted to make one comment on your point. It actually relates to the previous question person. Who is training an install process? Can we leave landscapers and contractors to plant a 15-gallon, knowing that they are going to properly treat that root system and do pruning? Perhaps the B&B is a better solution and a little more forgiving.
Yeah. And I think that's why all the city foresters over the age of 40 always use 2-inch B&Bs in Colorado. It's because that dependability of planting, you know, results afterwards. So, but we could keep you here all day. So we really appreciate you.
Yeah, that's my question. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody.